I feel like I've got a tough gig following that. So you might be wondering what a veterinarian is doing at a degrowth conference, and to be honest, I've asked myself the same question. There was a bit of rubber arm twisting from Sarah. But I guess I came with some very tidy pages of notes actually, which have now turned into 2 pages of scribbles after listening to what everyone's had to say. And what you're going to hear me talk about today is pretty much been talked about already by some actor so far during the conference. So I think that's an important point though, right? Because there's a bunch of us across a whole bunch of different places in the sandpit that are having these conversations, and that's one of the ways that we're going to create this change, is that network you just spoke about from a slightly different perspective, but having lots of people having this conversation and sharing the message. I was going to start with a feminist plea and I forgot. I would like nobody to say, hey guys, how about we move on for whatever? Can we go whānau or folks or team collectively when we're addressing the team? That was just a total side issue to degrowth. That's just my feminist rant, thank you. Okay. So, in my real job, I'm an animal welfare advocate. Are there any other vets in the room, out of interest? No, didn't think there would be. So, this is a space that bringing animal welfare with energy scarcity and therefore the need for degrowth to the table, and including in some policy feedback that I've given to government. So around pigs and farrowing crates recently, I guarantee I was the only person, well, VAWA would have been the only organisation giving feedback to the government saying, when you make decisions about what you're doing about this pig situation, could you please think about the fact that we're going to have less energy in systems, so don't regulate to allow these animals to stay inside, where we have to move water, we have to move fodder, and we have to heat their houses, right? That's a stupid system for the next 20 or 30 years. I'm pretty sure MPI just wrote that off as she's slightly crazy. This is an animal welfare consultation, but nevertheless, it's another place to start that conversation. Okay, so the way we think about welfare, and also not well-being, so I'm kind of a purist about this. Welfare is a spectrum of things from good to bad. I consider that well-being is something at the hedonistic end of welfare. If I think about well-being, I'm like getting a massage and having a spirulina and, I don't know, doing other things that, give me a lot of joy. We're still fussing around welfare for animals, and I would argue actually for people we're still fussing about welfare too. So I'm very clear about the fact that we should talk about welfare, not well-being. And additionally, we have no science of well-being. We don't have a Bachelor of Animal Wellbeing Science or Human Wellbeing Science. There's no metrics to determine that. So that's another plea. No guys, no wellbeing. I think about welfare using this interconnectedness, and people have talked about this in different contexts and put up different diagrams, and I acknowledged that yesterday there was different Māori frameworks put up as well. I don't really care. This is one of these things where it doesn't matter. So VAWA talks about one health, one welfare, Te Ao Māori as the frameworks within which we think about doing our advocacy. The only thing that matters in all of those is that it's interconnected, right? That you can't extract those things. So if we're moving one lever, we're going to be affecting other things. And I really don't want to spend time fussing about which is the right one to use. Doesn't matter. Move on. Perfection isn't what we're after here. It's about progress. I would just say that one health, one welfare model is stupid, because clearly the environment can't be there. Everything has to be constrained by the global ecosystem. I'm not going to change that, because the one health, one welfare model is an internationally accepted model. But when I talk about it, I throw that ring around it. Irritate the purists. Yesterday, Jonathan talked about the multiplicity of interconnected problems. He talked about creeping, slow, and long problems. I like to talk about wicked problems, partly because I like to use provocative language that pisses people off because it gets their attention, but actually also because it's an acknowledged term. And it's essentially all the things that Jonathan talked about. So these interconnected, multifactorial problems that can't be solved by pulling one lever. Whatever the outcome is that we get to, there's not a linear pathway. It's likely to be quite jumbled. It's a spider web. And I was interested to hear Nate say, this isn't a problem, it's a predicament, and that's another one of my little mantras. I completely agree, and again, I'm not going to change the term wicked problem. It's embedded. but it's not actually a problem, right? A problem has a solution. You know, if you're a math magician in the room, you're solving for x equals one thing, right? That's the solution. This isn't a single solution predicament. It's a predicament where there's a number of responses that need to be made in order to make progress towards the end goal, whatever that is. And this came up a lot of times yesterday too, and this is something I'm really passionate about. I'm not an expert. And a number of people have sort of alluded to this need to engage human behaviour change, or the psychological aspect of what we're doing, and how do we create change better by using those tools. I firmly believe we need to engage experts in that field to help us create narratives that are going to speak to people. I'm going back, you're not supposed to be reading that yet. If you're a scientist, data might change your mind, because that's how we're trained to think. And I'm a quantitative scientist who understands qualitative science, for goodness sake, you know. I'm joking, all the social scientists in the room. But for the vast majority of the population, data doesn't change our behaviour, and we know that. That's borne out in the human behaviour change science. So we need to get these people engaged in this conversation and use their expertise to help us create more momentum. I don't want to go through this in detail, just to say they're big, connected. There's a whole bunch of disagreement about what a wicked problem is, how you fix it, who needs to be engaged. The common things are, there's this interconnectedness. You need a whole bunch of different people at the table, which is what you just spoke about, Emma. Like no one organisation or person can fix this. And those stakeholders hold different views. And it's really important to have all of those at the table as we create those responses towards the outcome. Talked about predicament versus response. You're not meant to read that. That's how they define them. Don't worry about the details. Think about it like this. Simple problem, wicked problem. That's all you need to know. Lots of other useful diagrams on the internet. But this really resonated with me. The action of the individual to combat a wicked problem has very little impact without the collective and coordinated action of others. And that's where we have all of these different people playing in the sandpit, and then we're going to end up bringing them together to drive that change. So one individual is really unlikely to solve to create a response to the bigger predicament, but it's a really important part of the network. Okay, so resilient communities. Again, I was interested. I didn't make I sent this in like a week ago, and this list, you'll think that I cheated and I did it yesterday, but I didn't. So short versus long-term thinking, right? We know that. Everyone's spoken about it. Greed versus sufficiency. That one's for you, Catherine. Exports versus local, right? Like we know we have an ag sector that's set up to, just from an exports basis, and this is something that really irritates me, and I'm going to talk about it from a food security perspective shortly, and Emma just alluded to the lack of food security in the local community. Politics versus prosperity. How do we get politicians to make good decisions so that we can be prosperous and understand that that doesn't have to mean pursuing perpetual growth? They're not getting that at the moment, obviously. Economics versus ecology. Growth versus limits. So none of that's new. So that's all the current narrative, right? That's why why we're told we can't shift, or those are the drivers to what the current situation is. And this is where human behaviour change comes in. We need to create a different narrative. We've got to start collectively talking about this differently. And the example I'll use is in my animal welfare advocacy. I've been one of the champions of trying to get cats at home, right? Not in your house necessarily, can I just say that's bad for their welfare? But cats safe and happy at home. Now, we used to talk about containing cats, and it used to upset a lot of people because it sounds like you're putting them in a steel cage, and we know we don't like that. The pigs don't like that, and the chickens don't like that. Cats won't like it either. So we did some behaviour change work, and they created this whole narrative for us, and everybody in the cat advocacy community now talks about keeping cats safe and happy at home. So if you go and look at the media, you'll see everybody saying the same thing, and that's what starts to create the momentum. So just say again, if there's a philanthropist in the room or a human behaviour change expert, please, could you join together and get this piece of work done? That's just what I was ranting about. The experts need to come to the table. Okay, so resilient communities. What we need is high welfare systems for the planet, for people and animals. I'm focusing on food security here because we've just run a campaign on this, presented a parliamentary petition. Angela Clifford's speaking in the next section, and she was one of the people that I worked with on this particular piece of advocacy. I was outraged, and I didn't know until about a year ago, having met Angela. Angela didn't enrage me, that was a really bad sentence. What she told me enraged me. which is we don't have a national food strategy. Nobody in this country is responsible for making sure you have access to delicious, nutritious, locally produced kai. That is an outrage. I just about said it an expletive then. That is an outrage. Like, we produce so much food in this country, and yet none of that is actually specifically focused on going to our own communities. And I just want to, this is for you, Mike, Joy. We also don't feed 40 million people, right? We export milk powder as the main thing that goes out, and it gets turned into confectionery. It's not food, is it, Mike? He gave me a bit of a lecture about that once. So, you know, we also need to change that narrative. We're not saving the world, and if we fell off the planet, like, who's going to care? We're sending milk powder out to make confectionery and some other food, to be fair. There's some other stuff that does go. But that narrative that the Paris Agreement Part 2 is going to be materially affected if we, de-intensify agriculture because the whole world will starve, it's just bullshit. Let's be honest. So that's the national food strategy. We need to sort that out, and we need a national food strategy to make sure we get access to that food. Imagine if farmers could stand up and go, we feed our people first. How cool, how proud would they feel? There's so much good that can come out of that. Okay, so we need de-intensified resilient systems, and Emma's spoken about a number of reasons why the system isn't resilient at the moment. From an animal perspective, total bias here, but we need high welfare systems. Ethically and morally, it's the right thing to do, but additionally, those high welfare systems are more likely to be de-intensified and reduced energy inputs going into them. Think about a conventional dairy farm, PKE, fertiliser. If you're in Canterbury and you're ruining the water, Mike, that's for you, Mike, that's not you that's ruining the water, obviously. You're moving water around onto a piece of the country that's basically a desert so that we can grow grass and then export milk powder that's dried with coal. It's a great system. So, you know, we need to take out all of those inputs and create systems that are more resilient and don't need that energy that's going into them. And from a planet perspective, like local biodiverse food systems, right? So we've never existed on this planet without having animals in our food systems, and moving to plant-based diets, well, we need to consume less, and we certainly need less intensive feedlots like we see in the States. I'm going to put Monique on the line here and say our future systems will include animals, and we will be eating them, because we're going to need them for manure, we're going to need them for draft, and I can't see personally, once we hit these energy constraints, that we can do that without them. The addition to that is that plant monocultures are incredibly unhealthy for the environment, right? So if you're growing hectares and hectares and hectares of soybean, we've got fungicides, herbicides, pesticides going into them. We're turning over the land every year, ruining the soil structure. There's a whole bunch of reasons why that's a stupid system. Like local biodiverse, monocultures are terrible things. Okay, food security, we need a plan. That relates to high welfare systems for the animals, which are going to be de-intensified. They're going to have better survival in emergencies too. So if you're a broiler chicken, your heart is not really able to oxygenate you very well. And the idea of some sort of emergency coming over the areas where those broiler chickens live means we've condemned them to death before we even started. They can't run because their hearts won't let them. Half of them have got a whole bunch of lesions on their legs anyway. And they wouldn't know what to do if you dropped the sides and asked them to leave, because all they've done is sit in one place and grow incredibly quickly. They're not resilient systems, so and all the energy that goes into stacking them up. So we need to de-intensify those, get slow-growing chickens and set them free under the trees to be a part of the light local and biodiverse farming system, which is also de-intensified, meaning we've got a healthier planet. Bit repetitive, isn't it? De-intensified. Light local biodiverse systems. Right, that's pretty straightforward. Why doesn't it happen? We all know this, because we've focused on the wrong things, no matter which way you look at it. What's the common thing in there? I would just say some pretty piss-poor leadership. And I really hate when people say there's been no leadership. Let's be really clear. There's been absolutely clear leadership to get us to where we've got to, right? 1990s double exports, the dairy system, Dairy NZ's advice to dairy farmers about how to run a dairy system, fertiliser companies coming in and saying this is how much fertiliser you need to put in your systems. That's leadership, shitty leadership, but it is leadership. So they shouldn't get a free pass on no leadership, and they should be told to set about fixing it, because that would be really quite difficult for them, rather than resigning and making someone else do it. I can't read that from here because my eyesight's not good enough to see the words, so maybe you can't either. have to look at the big one. Should have made the font bigger, shouldn't I? I've just talked about all this, less inputs, right? But also, if we're going to do this on a local system, we then don't have to transport this food around. We don't have the entire food bowl of the East Coast getting wiped out, and then there's being no food in supermarkets in Southland. So this focus on the supermarkets also isn't going to fix it, and the work that Angela and Hilary from Freedom Farms and I did on this, we created this big roadmap. Supermarkets is only one part of our food system, right? Like there's all of these other dynamics that play into it that mean the Grocery Commission is not going to fix this problem. We need a holistic conversation to sit down with all of those stakeholders to build a truly resilient food system that feeds you healthy, nutritious food. Also a bit of regenerative agriculture. Hate the term, it upsets people, whatever, light local biodiverse systems. Let's not fuss about the details. I think I've covered all of this. But also just to say, and I had a conversation with someone yesterday about the Manakai initiative. So they've done a massive amount of work already around national food strategy, and whatever happens after our parliamentary petition gets into the House in the next sort of 6 weeks, that Manakai work will certainly feed into the next steps. We need a national food strategy, to say it again, and also talked about this as well, no crates and cages. But those additional things that we see, and you've seen in the media, cows on mud, it's a little bit more difficult to take, heinously offensive photos of dairy cows in Canterbury with no shade because they just look like cows standing in the sunshine. Cattle start suffering from heat stress at about 23 degrees with a little bit of humidity. And if those of you who know Canterbury would know that most days in the summer are over 23 degrees. Now, production also is affected. We know they make less milk when they get hot and they experience heat stress, and yet we have done nothing to shift that system. It's quite tricky. They've got centre pivots there. Trees and centre pivots don't go together very well. This is where we need the leadership conversation to say, what does this need to look like in 20 years' time, and start planting trees. Can I just also say, Kyle Wills, if you're watching this somewhere in the world, because we had a bit of a set to on LinkedIn, it's not in the corners of where the centre pivot can't reach. That's such a tiny area. It's completely ridiculous. We need properly treed up farms for these animals to be in. It's better, we'd get less transevaporation and a whole bunch of other benefits from it as well. Okay, so we need animal welfare reform to make that happen. So we actually do make sure we're compliant with our Act, which we're currently not. Now, whether or not you think this is important, just last week, the EU made a decision to go back on an agreement around getting crates and cages out of their farm system. This is hugely disappointing. There was 1.4 million people that signed up. 1.4 million people who signed up to a petition to get rid of crates and cages, what's called End the Cage Age. With the impact of cost of living, the European Commission has now undone that decision. And this is what's going to play out, right? So we're going to make a few steps towards what we need to do, and then the pressure's going to come on. Food's expensive. We've seen it play out locally, and all of the good stuff that in the direction that we're going will get undone. It's super disappointing. So we need to reduce stress and get better welfare. Resilient communities was going to mean better welfare for everybody, which is good news. This is a win-win-win. Oh, now my button's not working. Some ideas, wicked problems. You've heard all of that stuff before. And I heard this term the other day on RNZ, relentless incrementalism, right? Just little steps in the right direction. That's those responses. And if you're a crazy ultra runner, any of those in the audience? Yeah, good on you. Relentless forward motion, right? One foot in front of the other. As long as you're still moving forward, that matters when you're running 160 kilometres. They're quite nuts. That's it. Sorry for going over.